Hope you got your tea. We're going to talk about serious topics. And I think this is probably in the top 3. The death of the middle class.
This is the life of a broke Gen Zer.
The price of gas has shot up.
Plains, the value of real estate is soaring faster than people's income.
Inflation is a real challenge to American families.
And as gas prices top $5 on average nationwide.
In May, inflation hit 8.6%.
As far as when prices go up, I just increase prices.
If you ask the average teenager or even adult up until their 30s what they think of the idea of the American dream, they will tell you that it was a flat-out lie. The American dream is the idea that if you go to school...
I'm almost 40, and everyone my age would agree.
School, get a degree, and work hard in your job, you'll be able to buy a house with a white picket fence, get married, and enjoy your life while you prepare for your retirement. It's associated with the middle class because this dream is supposed to be a reality for the average American. But our world has changed. There are tons of factors that go into the death of the middle class and the growing disparity between the rich and the poor, and while I'm no finance expert, I've come to learn some pretty shocking statistics. So let me do my best to explain to you why the middle class is dying and why the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. One of the easiest ways we can first understand what's going on is by looking at what is intuitively misunderstood. The fact that we are not in a recession. In fact, the economy is technically doing better than ever. The global GDP is higher than any other point in history. In July of this year, the stock market in America hit an all-time high. In 2023, the unemployment rate hit 3.4%, a 53-year low, and
This is the COVID spike, and as you can see, it's statistically irrelevant, and I went back onto what it was trending anyways following the pandemic.
The unemployment rate hit 3.4%, a 53-year low, and inflation has been lowering as well. So the biggest question is, why doesn't it feel this way for most people? The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which is an economic indicator that measures how optimistic consumers feel about their finances and the state of the economy, reached its lowest ever record since they began tracking in 1966, which is even lower than during the Great Recession in 2008. And this is...
My class graduated in 2006, and we had 2 pretty good years, and then obviously 2008 hit. And so like pretty much right when most of my class was in college, the Great Recession happened. And I think from then, all bets were off the table, whether it be college is going to guarantee you a good career or that there is a American dream. I believe that kind of died from the Great Recession. That point was the end.
This is where our understanding of this issue can really start to develop. These statistics are economic theories based on the overall economy rather than each individual's reality. We all tend to view the economy based on a very self-centered point of view, and I don't use the term self-centered as a means to piss you off, but rather describe how most of us just look at how the economy is affecting us and the people around us. So let's look at what the average person typically spends their money on and how those prices have changed. Food prices have increased anywhere between 20 to 200% in the past 30 or so years. Want to go to school? Well, you'll be paying at least 400% more than what tuition was in the 80s.
So let's stop there because I want to show you a correlation that isn't talked about very much. This is when the Department of Education started, 1979. And if you look at the price of education, now understand the Department of Education is really just about providing financing for students. It's their number one task, I guess. The department identifies 4 key functions: establishing policies on federal financial aid for education and distributing, as well as monitoring those funds. So as you can see, ever since the Department of Education was started, education has gone up significantly. It's shot up, just like straight up exponentially. And so one could argue that they have failed at what their task was.
Thinking about buying a house or maybe renting an apartment, that boosted it up about 700 to 900%. Of course, the prices of things are bound to go up as wages increase, we print more money, or different things are in different demand, but the amount in which our wages have increased compared to how much goods and services and stuff like that have increased is absolutely absurd. At 25 years old, when adjusted for inflation, our grandparents' pre-tax income was $74,000. The annual cost of public college as a percent of income was 14%, and the house price to income was 3 times, meaning a house cost 3 times their annual income. For our parents, it was worse, and for us, the numbers can't even compare. Not only do we earn less pre-tax income on average, but public education and home ownership is outrageously more expensive. The biggest question I wanted to understand after hearing this so many times is why. What caused education, which is a massive contributor to you making more money and of course being more educated, to increase so much? And after getting the degree that should have helped you buy a house, why is this now increasingly less realistic? Why have housing and education prices risen so much? Well, for education, there's individual things within this field specifically that only applies to itself, but really all these things are connected. Marketing and recruiting has gotten more expensive, colleges are investing more in student experiences like extracurricular activities, and state and federal investment subsidies in higher education have been on a steep decline since the 2008 recession. Colleges are also artificially raising the price to look more competitive without really increasing admission rates all too much. But hey, there's some good news here. If your income is low enough, you can qualify for a scholarship. You know who doesn't qualify for that scholarship though? The middle class, which is basically just another word for poor now. But really what's happened in the past few years, the thing that's made the biggest impact, that has impacted not only just housing and education, is what happened in 2020. Right before the pandemic, interest rates were quite low, around 4%. So a lot of people locked in their home loans at this 4%. Then when COVID hit and people weren't working, the economy was about to go into a massive recession. The government had to do something. So what did they do? They printed $5 trillion in stimulus checks to make sure people would still spend money.
Simply flooded the system with money.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about it.
Wow, look at his face. That is a guilty conscience. Look at this.
Yes, we did. That's another way to think about
The
it.
way he looks
This
down
shot
like
inflation
that.
up to 7%, which then required the Federal Reserve to act. You see, when inflation gets too high, the Federal Reserve controls it by raising interest rates to slow the economy and inflation down. And when that happened, the people who already own their homes did not want to sell their homes because they couldn't get another home at an equivalent loan or price. So home inventories remained low and people were forced to fight for rentals. The supply and demand of homes has led rental prices to be higher than ever, and they were really already quite high. But it's not even only that, it's the artificial constraining of all goods and services from the few who control them, like major corporations and landlords, to create scarcity and see what the market will support. So where did all that stimulus money go? Did it help the economy? Well, it was in fact not spent to help stimulate the economy. Most of it was either saved or put into the stock market, which made the biggest companies in the world obscenely richer, resulting in the biggest wealth transfer in human history. The richest 1% gained nearly 2/3 of all new wealth created since 2020, which is almost twice as much money as the bottom 99% of the world's population. In 1989, the share of household wealth for those over 70 was 19%, and for those under 40, it was 12%. Now that number has risen to 30% for those over 70 and dropped to just 7% for those under 40. For the first time in US history, the top 1% now owns more wealth than the middle 60%. This signals an indisputable fact. If you owned a home, stocks, or capital, aka assets, before 2020, you're probably big chillin' with big bucks. But for everyone else, you've gotten royally screwed. But Cole, Gen Z are just drama queens. Yeah, kinda, but also no. Gen Z is living in unprecedented inequality, and that's where this feeling of the economy being in an awful state right now is coming from. It's because the majority of the people in the world are not reaping the benefits from a growing economy. When you make an economy in which people have to work multiple soul-sucking jobs that are so detached from what we are naturally designed to do, with no real benefits just so they can pay for their bare necessities, and in some cases they can't even do that, it makes younger generations feel like there is zero real purpose behind working.
I want to pause it right there. I just want to go over the Pareto principle with you guys. We'll show this short clip here because this issue, I'm not really sure. I have no answers for how we're going to get over this problem of wealth distribution.
There's a good book that I would recommend reading called The Great Leveler. by Walter Scheidel. It's a new book, relatively new book, and he details out the ineradicability of inequality. So part of the problem with this process that we just described, where success breeds success and failure breeds failure, is that the people who are succeeding get a disproportionate share of the resource pie, let's say. So, everyone knows that about money, right? Because the 12 richest people in the world, the 85 richest people in the world have as much money as the bottom 2 billion, which seems, well, let's say unfair. Now, it's certainly unequal. Now, whether it's unfair is slightly
Jordan,
different.
the statistic is the eight richest have equal to the bottom 3.5 billion.
Yeah, well, it's probably worse than it was when I looked at this about 3 years ago. So, but it doesn't matter because you get the point. But
it's crazy.
But the thing is that this is not something that only applies to money. It applies to everything that's creatively produced. So the same rule applies to number of records sold by recording artists. The same rule applies to number of books sold by novelists. The same rule applies to number of goals scored by NHL hockey players. The same rule applies to the population of cities and the mass of stars and the size of trees in the jungle. It's like the inequality problem is way more troublesome, again, than mere capitalism. It's a terrible problem. And Scheidel's work, which is really, really interesting, he's traced back inequality 15,000 years. You can do it, for example, let's say you find a Neolithic burial site and there's 200 people in it. So these people would be buried with their possessions. And obviously some of them decay, but some of them don't. And like some of them are buried with gold. Well, hardly any of them. And the tiny proportion of people who are buried with gold are buried with a lot of gold. So you can even derive a Gini coefficient estimate, which is an estimate of inequality from burial sites. And it looks like as soon as you get a surplus, you get inequality. And that's a rough thing, because you might think, well, even in hunter-gatherer societies where there's no surplus, there's still inequality, because there's inequality of friendship, there's inequality of health, and there's inequality of sexual access. And those things are not trivial. But when you're thinking about it purely economically, you start to get inequality as soon as you get a surplus. You think, oh, that's interesting. So there's a natural rule, which is surplus generates inequality. All right, so how do you solve that? And Scheidel's book says, well, that's easy. You just get rid of the surplus. Right, and that's not good. So like he found, and so one of the things he did was statistical analysis, because one of the things you might ask is, well, let's say you have your measures of inequality, and then you can track them around the world, and you can track whether or not the inequality is generated by a right-wing government or a left-wing government. And then you might hope, well, the left-wing governments would ameliorate inequality. There's no evidence for that at all. It doesn't look like inequality is it doesn't look like the amelioration of inequality is within the purview of political organization. Yeah. And you should not hear that with any degree of happiness whatsoever, because the social science on inequality is also clear. As inequality levels increase, societies destabilize. And the best indicator of that, I already mentioned that was work that was done by Martin Daly and Margot Wilson at McMaster University in Canada. They're really interested in what drove male homicide, because most homicide is male on male. It's mostly young males. It's mostly within race. And it's mostly status competition, right? So, and the status competitions get intense where inequality increases. So where everyone's poor, so if you rank order American states and Canadian provinces by inequality, the poor provinces where everyone's poor, there's no male aggression. And the rich provinces and states where everyone's rich, there's no male homicide. But the states and provinces where inequality is high, the male homicide rate starts to climb up. And it's probably the most aggressive males who get most aggressive most rapidly when inequality increases. So there's a psychological component, but inequality drives male homicide. 0.9 is the correlation, which means that you actually don't need any other explanation for male homicide. Maybe you throw in alcohol just as an extraneous variable. You don't need any other explanation for the male homicide rate than inequality. It's staggering work. It's absolutely staggering work. And so the thing is that a meritocracy will drive inequality. And then you have a problem because people stack up at zero and they can't get out of zero, because that's what happens as inequality increases. People think about when you're playing Monopoly, the game. I mean, that's a perfect example of how inequality emerges. Everybody's equal to begin with. Everybody basically plays a random game, because Monopoly is basically a random game. I mean, there's some skill in it, but not much. So it's a random game. So what happens when everyone starts equal and you play a random game? One person ends up with everything. Everyone else stacks up at 0. Now, Scheidele's book basically shows the only way out of that is various forms of war, including revolution, and epidemics. That's it. That's the only thing he's been able to track. That. And what happens is, well, you level everyone, and then inequality decreases. It's like, well, okay. Like, that doesn't seem like a really great solution.
That was a pretty interesting clip. So let's get back to the original video.
Definition of the middle class is not living the American dream, it's living paycheck to paycheck. Listen, I can't just leave you in the midst of this doomerism and despair that I've presented in this video. I have to give you some hope and advice, and I really do hope you listen and don't run away now, because financial literacy is one of the most important skills that you can learn. Can you go back in time and yell at your child self to buy Bitcoin in 2010 instead of playing Call of Duty? No, you can't, but there are ways to make yourself more valuable in a market like this, save more, and make more money as well. Firstly, just as a base recommendation, if you don't have a lot of money coming in, I really do recommend that you live with your parents longer than your parents probably lived with their parents. There's really no shame in it.
I agree with this advice 100%.
If you're trying to save money, and it's, like I said, it's a lot harder to be able to afford rent working just the average job now. And I did the same, which allowed me to work on this online business before it really took off. And I did not move out and start renting until I had about 6 months to a year of saved income that I could use on rent. You need to start investing in assets as soon as you possibly can. Are we making the rich richer by investing in these companies on their public stock market? Yes, but what the f else are you gonna do right now? So as early as you can, start investing in index funds like the Vanguard S&P 500, which on average has a yearly return of 10%. This is the bare minimum you should do in investments. And what I did, once my income started to increase, I didn't start spending more and living lavishly. I instead just put more money per month into my stock portfolio. I know that we are all, to an extent, victims of a generation that kind of fucked us over, the boomers, and things are objectively harder in terms of mental health and finances, at least. Maybe not quality of life, but mental health and finances definitely. Regardless of that fact, man, I just can't play the victim. You can't play the victim. You cannot let them win. You cannot let them laugh at your poor ass self as you struggle to make ends meet every single day. Just work hard, build something that you can genuinely say you enjoy showing up to every day, that produces enough income for you to invest in assets, and then eventually.
And that's key. That's really all you can do, is just work harder, try and build up those around you, and try and build up yourself. Focus on improvement, focus on working hard, focus on serving others, because there's nobody coming to save you. And if you can, you need to be the one that saves others. That's it for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed these videos. Go ahead and like the video if you liked the video. And I really want to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. So let's start a discussion on this. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching.